I'm recording this information. I have presented some of it already before, but it seems to me that around the time the midterms come back, not just from this course, but from other courses too, this is the right moment to just reintroduce some of these ideas, because I tend to talk about them mostly at the beginning of the semester, not so much. I've been trying to talk a bit more about it around exam time, but the focus hasn't been strong on this. Okay, so this is just some advice, not just about studying, although there are some study suggestions, but also just about how you think about the exam. So I'm going to talk. Whoops, sorry. I'm going to talk just a little bit about before the exam, sort of framing, and then during the exam, breathing, because those are things that you can adopt next time if you haven't done so before. And then the rest of it is sort of once your exam is completed and you get the grade back, you know, your response to that. And so hopefully, I mean, you're all grown-ups. You probably know this stuff already, but I'm offering it as a nudge maybe to help. So I think I've mentioned this in class before, but framing is sort of how you think about something. And I had this experience which really showed me that the amount you suffer, I guess, or how something affects you partly, and maybe to a pretty large extent, depends on how you think about it. I was getting a shiatsu massage, which is an occasional treat. It's very painful, but it really relieves the tension in the muscles, and so you do feel really good afterwards. And the massage guy, the massage artist, whatever you call him, the pressure was a little harder, more intense than I was used to, and it was incredibly painful. And I was thinking to myself, I should really ask this guy to stop, to ease up a little bit, because it's just unbearable. And I was just about to ask him, could you think you could just, drop the pressure just a little bit, when I suddenly remembered that I had promised a student a reference letter the day before, and I hadn't done it. And I had all the materials on my office computer, and I started thinking, okay, what am I going to do? I've got to get this to them. I can't let them down. I'll have to make time. I'll rearrange this, and I'll go up to my office and make sure I get this done, and etc. And something like 10 or 15 minutes passed while I was kind of rearranging my whole schedule in my head and trying to figure out, how am I going to deal with this? I've made a mistake. I've got to fix it, blah, blah, blah. And suddenly, he was on the other side. He was working on, my leg on the right side instead of my shoulder on the left side. And I realized he'd moved all the way around, done all this incredibly painful stuff. And I hadn't even noticed, because I was thinking about something else. And so where you put your attention and how you think about what's happening to you, in part determines whether it's a really awful or an okay experience. Okay, so I put that out there as an example, because I've heard people say this before, meditation teachers and that sort of thing. But this was a real example where it was almost unbelievable that I just kind of zoned out, had no sensation of pain at all, because I just wasn't paying attention to it. So where you put your attention matters. And the other thing about a lot of students, I've heard them go, oh, I'm scared, I'm really scared, I'm really nervous, I'm anxious about this exam. And those are legitimate feelings. People feel like they're going to be judged, and they're worried about how they perform and so on. But if you think about the physical sensations of being nervous, they're almost identical to those physical feelings, the little fluttering in your stomach, and that sort of thing, when you're looking forward to something really exciting and enjoyable. And so you can fool your body in a way if you reframe what's happening and say, I'm really excited, I get this chance to show what I've learned in the course. And the body can then interpret those sensations as being excited as opposed to being nervous. And I put it there. A lot of students go, oh yeah, and they don't really listen. I'm a lot older than they are, and they probably think I don't know anything about them or their lives. But I do know what it's like to be nervous about an exam, and I have had experiences that show the way you frame it makes a difference to how you feel about it overall. And also, I was a self-defense instructor for many years, and so framing is really important before, during, and after an experience, but also breathing is really super important. And so making sure you get lots of oxygen into your brain is essential. And by breathing slowly and deeply, breathe into a count of maybe 6, hold it for just a second or two, and then count out 6 as you're exhaling. That physically relaxes your body a little bit, and it gets more oxygen into your brain. Okay, and I say that all the time, and I'm not aware that students actually follow this advice, but some of them may do so. Okay, so after the exam, this is the part people hate the most in a way. They hate it more than actually writing the exam, is when they get it back and it's got a number on it and the number isn't as high as they would have liked. And so, again, this is about framing. It's about how you think about it. The number you get on the test doesn't mean anything about you. It's not personal. We didn't sit there and go, oh, this is Jillian Smith. Let's give her a really crappy mark because we don't like her. The way we grade, to be honest, is we look through your answer and we try really hard to find places where we can give credit, right? We're not sitting there trying to punish people or take marks off or anything like that. We're trying to award grades, and we will award them as well as we can, given what you've told us about what you know. So do make sure that you really present us a really strong case for giving you credit for understanding, okay? And you want to keep them in perspective. So what if you don't pass a particular exam, or your grade is only in the B and you really wanted an A? Doesn't make any difference to you as a human being. You are still the smart, funny, kind, good friend, insert whatever, musician, artist, whatever it is that is unique and wonderful about you. None of that is affected by the number on this test. It's just a measure of how much you knew about the material, and in part, your test-taking ability. So it doesn't hurt to work on the test-taking ability if that's not a strong point for you. So just, you need to start with that. And I will tell you that as a person, I've been teaching since 2004, and I have received some very hurtful, to be honest, comments in the feedback, because students sometimes don't do well in a course and they think that it's your fault, and that if only you had, I don't know, magically waved a wand, they would suddenly have learned everything. And those comments, some of them are, like, I think deliberately unkind, and none of us is immune. But what I have found works is to just take a day or two and just let it sit, like look at it, read it, and then let it go. And you can come back to it in a couple of days when you're not likely to be as upset or, unhappy about it. And then just look and go, okay, they said this really awful thing, but is there some truth in this? And is there something I can do about it? If they don't like my face, there's nothing I can really do about that. But if there was something in my approach to teaching that would have been better done another way, if they've been clear and specific about that, I can consider whether that's something worth me acting on, right? And so you want to take some time, have your emotional reaction, because that's perfectly normal, but then put the emotion aside before you come to look at the exam, and then put on your analytical hat for the rest of it. Okay, so after the exam, the very first thing is to look for the places where you got things right. Where did you get things right? Okay, and is there a common feature? So it's possible that most of the stuff you got right was stuff that you actually knew really well. So you really thought, I don't know, the worm stuff was most interesting. So you spent lots of time on that, and you even looked extra stuff online, and you learned everything. But you found the flies kind of boring, and you didn't really look into that or pay much attention to it. So it could be you were just more interested in certain topics. So then that if I ask questions about worms in the future, you're going to do well with that and not so well with flies. So that's an analysis of your strength. Maybe some of the material we covered, and I know this is true depending on which pre-req courses you've taken and other co-req type of courses, it may be that some of this material has been covered in previous classes, and so therefore that stuff was easier for you, which would make sense. Are you really good at memorization? Some people just naturally, when I was in high school, I could memorize almost anything. I could tell you where it was on the page and what the picture was beside it, but sometimes I didn't have any actual idea of what that stuff meant. So if you asked me to analyze it, I wouldn't have been able to do it, but I could certainly parrot back, word for word, all the stuff. I will say that a lot of people that are really good at memorizing actually misinterpret that as being really, really, really smart. But if you can memorize a bunch of gibberish and you don't know what it means and you can't do anything with it, that's not necessarily complete intelligence, right? You need to have both the ability to remember, basic information, but you also need to be able to analyze it, use it in a new situation, modify it a little bit to suit a different situation, use it to predict an outcome. That's what we really want. And there are some people too who are not so good at the memorizing part, but they're really great at the problem solving, predicting, and interpreting, and so on. So just look at it and just kind of make an assessment to begin with of what are my strengths, because whatever way I've been preparing, it suits those particular strengths. So you can do more of that for those types of questions. But then you want to follow up. Okay, so what questions did I get incorrect? Or I only got partial credit. So what kind of questions are these? For some of the people, it will be those memorization ones. Like my analysis was pretty good, but there was certain stuff I just couldn't remember, and I didn't either include it or I didn't get it correct, right? And so it's like the type of question, but also what was the reason they were wrong, right? If the information was incorrect, then you haven't learned the material appropriately, and you're going to have to start there. But if you were generally correct, but the answer wasn't complete or didn't have enough detail, I will have put that on the exam. More information is needed, or I'll have put a little comment that shows all the things that needed to be there. Then that's all you need to work on. So it means it doesn't mean that you didn't understand the material. It means that you haven't put a complete answer. Some people, they don't include certain information because they will say it's obvious, or there's no need to say that, right? And this is what I meant when I said try to make a really good case for convincing us that you understand the material. So there is a question that I asked about the C. elegans lecture when I said, why is it that the ABP and the P2 cell have to be physically touching each other in order for the GLP-1 receptor to be activated? And some students said because it's a notch receptor. Okay. However, that's not sufficient, because the fact that it's a receptor isn't enough information. You have to tell me it's membrane bound and that the ligand is also membrane bound. And so the cells have to be touching each other for that activation of the receptor to occur. Now, it may to you be obvious because you know that I know that notch and delta are membrane bound. But the fact is that there are students in the class who don't know that. And so they'll say because it's notch, and they won't tell me anymore because they don't know what the actual answer is. So you have to show us even if you think it's obvious or that it follows logically from what you've said, right? So that is sometimes all that needs to happen. You basically knew the material quite well, and you lost part marks here and there because you didn't provide sufficient detail. You didn't prove that you really understood. And for sure, I know that some students know more than what we gave them credit for. But we have to have evidence. We have to have you actually say it right out. These are membrane-bound receptors and ligands, or whatever it is that the question was about. Okay, and so you may have to learn the material better, but you may also just have to think more carefully about how you craft a really good answer to a question. And I did provide a few samples and showed how the grading was allocated, but if people want, just email me if you think this would be helpful. I can provide a few more samples that show that as well, like what's a complete and correct answer. Okay. And then I found this guy. He's called The Helpful Professor, and he has a blog, and this isn't too out of date. But he basically has a whole set of different kinds of strategies for how to deal with feedback and so on. And he acknowledges, just like I just did, the feedback can be depressing. It's like, especially if you put in a lot of effort and tried really hard and then you didn't get the result you wanted. Um, and sometimes you just want to go, okay, I give up. But never give up. Have a growth, what we call a growth mindset. Be aware that you can always improve. Um, Doing well in school isn't a fixed ability. You can develop it just like you could develop, you may not become a professional musician, but you can learn and study and practice more at being a musician, or being an athlete or being an artist. I take painting lessons and I'm an awful painter, but I'm getting better with some effort. It's not a natural ability for me, but if you have a growth mindset, um, you work on improving at all times. And so it's another sort of little tip. Have a growth mindset, right? Don't give up, keep going. Curiosity and persistence are the two most important qualities of a scientist. Okay. And then, as I said, you want to respond to the feedback that you received, and if you frame it as being a musician or an athlete, my student athletes, they're fantastic. They come to see me and they go, look, I didn't get the mark I was hoping for in this exam. This is how I study. What would you suggest? What can I change or modify or even just tweak a little bit to improve my performance? And that's because when they're on the basketball court or the baseball field or in track or whatever, sitting around and going, oh, the race wasn't fair is not going to help anything. What is going to help, though, is if they say, gosh, when I'm just taking off, when I just start, there's that funny little hesitation. I don't get out of the starting block as fast as I want, or you know, I'm not hitting the ball in baseball as well as I like. I'm not being able to place it, send it to the right direction. Maybe I have to change the angle. Maybe I have to lower the bat. Maybe I have to hold it further up. Maybe I have to lean my weight back. There's a million things you can do to tweak your performance. So you want to figure out first what you have to work on, and then you want to change how you prepare. So if it's memorization, if it's really just keeping the stuff in your head, then flashcards or some version of flashcards can work really well. So on one side you put the definition, on the other side you put the um, the term, right? So you've got the term on one side, the definition on the other. Hopefully the definition you've written in your own words. Or you could have a sketch. You've made a little sketch of the toll signaling pathway, and then you've left it blank, and you come back to it after a little while, and you put in the different participants, the spatula and toll and Easter, and the different components of it put in, and then maybe beside them just write what they're doing, you know. And I had a student who, she had a little notebook, and she basically had information on one side and then her explanations on the other side of the page, and then she just had folded the page over so she could only see the basic information, and then she practiced sort of explaining it to herself, and then she flipped over, opened up the page to see if that actually was correct. She was a terrific student. It's helpful to work in groups if you like to work with groups. Find somebody who has the same aims as you. You don't want someone who just wants to scrape through the class if you're trying to get an A+. But if you have like-minded people and you all get together and you're all just interested in scraping through, you can take turns quizzing each other on terminology and concepts and stuff, and you can make practice questions for each other, and practice answering it, and then look at the answers and see, is this complete? Is this correct? And then you want to review the material frequently, which I mentioned in class, I think today or yesterday, or whenever you're seeing this recently, let's say. And so basically this is what we call the curve of forgetting. So basically on day one, you go to class and you learn. And we call this 100%, not because you've learned everything in the class, but this is everything that you learned while you're within that lecture. Whatever things I've asked clicker questions on especially, but just the general information. By day 2, you will have lost between 50 and 80% of this. So you're remembering of what we did in class on Wednesday. By Thursday, you've lost at least a half of it, maybe more. And then it tails off, but by day 7, by a week later, you may remember 10% or less, right? And what that means is that by the time you get to day 30, you will understand, a couple of percent of, you will remember that, of that original lecture hour. And so this, unfortunately, this is approximately how long it takes to get to the midterm. So sometimes students, when they're studying for midterms, the stuff we covered earlier in the semester, they're having to relearn it as if they've never seen it before. And you may have to actually spend a lot of time relearning everything from scratch. Okay, but you can overcome the curve of forgetting. This is real learning research, by the way. And you can basically change that shape. So if you just simply reprocess the same information repeatedly. So if you, on day 2, take 10 quick minutes to skim through the lecture notes and just remind yourself of things. Oh yeah, she said this when we were looking at this image. Or, oh yeah, there was this clicker question and she asked about blah, blah, blah. And I mean, this is applicable to any course, right? So within 24 hours, spend 10 minutes just skimming through it, review it, and you raise the curve close to 100% again. 100% being whatever you learned that day, maybe not understanding every word of it. Okay. A week later, so by day 7, it only takes about 5 minutes. So you can still reactivate that same material, and it puts it back in the forefront of your mind. And then by day 30, it only takes a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes of your time, 2 to 4, for your brain to go, oh yeah, I know that. So when you go through the material repeatedly, it's a good investment of your time, because if you don't do this, then when you get to the day or two that you have to study before the midterm, it takes, for each hour, so suppose lectures were 60 minutes, it would take you between 40 and 50 minutes of relearning that material per lecture hour. So we're talking about a huge investment of time. One of the advantages of this kind of reviewing, there is time investment, but it's reasonable. It's really no worse than cramming at the last minute in terms of the overall time commitment, but it's spaced out in a more humane kind of way. But also, it puts it into your long-term memory, which means you're not going to just forget it after the exam. And then the second midterm comes and you need to understand the first midterm, so now you have to kind of review some of that material too, because otherwise the stuff we learned in the second half won't make sense without that understanding, if that makes sense. And also, if you learn it properly in prerequisite courses, then it's in your head when you get to the courses that follow, so that you have that as a strong foundation. There are many students in my upper division classes that just don't have, for example, a good sense of what's in a cell, or how a cell functions, or how genes work, or even a good sense of what a gene is. And part of that is because they have memorized at the last minute before an exam and then immediately forgotten the material. And if all you want to do is scrape through, that's fine, because not everybody is equally interested in the material. But if you plan to do well in your upper division courses, it will be really hard to do so unless you've built yourself this nice foundation. And this is a really good way of building that. And knowing material from this course is going to help you with some of the other courses that you're taking, and courses that you'll take next semester or the semester after that, if you learn it well and really understand it. Okay, so besides just reading or listening, understanding does require some sort of active grappling with the material. So it's not just reading over, but when you come to the actual studying part, make a mind map, like the concept maps you did in tutorial in the first week. But you can do things like, I had a student who wrote a poem once about a genetics experiment that we did, and he showed it to me because he was really pleased with how it turned out. And because he had to sort of struggle to figure out what parts rhyme and how to, he learned it really well, and he was able to explain it very clearly. But you can draw diagrams, flow charts, and so just do, if you haven't yet, or if you would like to review it, just look at my memorizing versus understanding video at the beginning of the semester. It's in the week 1 module. And some other things, active learning, I put these in the first lecture. This is a good time to go back and take a look at that. But you should make your own notes. Don't just read the ones I made. Those are the notes that I made that make sense to me, but it's possible that if you read through the text, you might want to scribble down your own notes. And especially in classes, I've provided you lecture notes, but there might be places where you have a question. So if you're actually thinking as you're learning, I'm blathering up front, but you might go, oh, I don't think I understand how that was. So tag it and then put a question. This, I don't understand. Is this signal diffusible or long range or short range, or how does this actually affect, blah, blah, blah. Put lots of questions in there for yourself. And again, the drawing diagrams, the concept maps. We do some of this, making up sample exam questions, exchanging them with others, and then answer them. I do have a file with some exam questions that were made up by a tutorial section way back in 2017 with my comments on them. And if students want to have a look at those to get ideas, you can just ask me for them and I can send them. We have a course discussion page. As far as I know, nobody's asked a question. And if you have a Discord page or something for the class and people are using that to help each other, that's fine. But I do always provide something where you could, on the course website, ask questions and then students can answer them. And when you do that, answering the questions can help you just as much as the person you're answering. And if you like to work in study groups, it's really valuable to help each other. Finally, there's a lot of things that probably are different from what I've talked about, but you can go to the Student Learning Commons. There's tons of free resources there, especially study skills and exam prep resources. This is the link for that, and I'll post these notes so that you can access that. But I want to make a special note for English language learners, because you have a special issue, which is that it's really hard for you to express clearly and accurately what you know when your skills in grammar and writing are weak. This is actually true, I think, also of native language, English language speakers who just don't have really good written skills. And so it's helpful to work on that, because if we can't understand what you've written, we don't know if you understand or not. And we're supposed to be grading your work based on your understanding. And I always worry so much, because there's often a few students where I'm pretty sure they must know more than what I can give credit for, but I can't. I don't have actual evidence that they know. And so I think a lot of students in that situation, they don't get proper credit for their understanding. But also it's harder for them to understand because English is challenging, right? And so there is a particular website you can go to, and there are actual resources to help you build those language skills. I know that speaking is usually easier than writing because you're speaking with other people every day. But then when you have to commit it to paper, writing things down isn't something we all do regularly. I do because I'm elderly, but as younger people, putting your thoughts into words in detail with clear and concise, professional sounding English is not something that you do regularly. And so it's helpful to get some practice at that. Okay, this is a bit longer than I intended, but I hope it will be of value. If not, you're welcome to just ignore all the advice, but it's well intentioned. Okay,